Thank you very much. I'm James Seymour. I'm a Principal Consultant at Apten Advisory. But this work that we did here was very much from when I was CEO at C4Net, and C4Net was the Centre for New Energy Technologies, which was a collaborative research group working in the energy space, in particular looking at energy data, how energy data could be more accessible, usable, and help future planning. I'm going to talk about one of our projects. So the company did over 80 projects in its time. I'm going to talk about one, but it was one very large collaborative project, and it benefited very much from the participation of the ECA. I'm just trying to get it to move on. There we go. We were generously supported by the ECA through the grants program, which provided some financial support into it. But actually, this was a huge project and had a lot of financial support from a lot of players, including other sponsor, Race for 2030, who supports ECA. We brought those parties together, not so much for the funding that came in, but university research is expensive. But it was around the participation. It was around bringing the right voices around the table. And this wasn't a project where we said, this is the challenge and let's put it off and try and get people to solve it. It was, we're all in this together and how can we collectively solve it? So it was very, very high and participatory. What the project was around, while we've got an integrated system plan that makes a really important role in planning our energy system, when we think of the infrastructure that is needed, so that we've got the transmission, we've got the major generation assets that are really well addressed within the integrated system plan or the ISP, that same plan looks at a distribution system through to consumer as being unconstrained. In other words, we can do what we want, there's no impact on the assets there. Now, of course, that doesn't happen. It's just that the challenge of trying to plan down there, it gets more complex and more complex as you move out towards the edge. And as consumers, we're horribly complex people. We use energy in a way that people don't always understand and know. However, when we do bring those groups together, we can address that, and that's what that's what I'll be talking about today in the project. We had over 100 people working on this project for over 2 years, and from very disparate groups, which provide a lot of learnings in itself. This was data rich. I'm not going to take you through the results here. I'm just trying to show that this was really sort of super data rich. So what did we do? We had 3 levels of project. One, right down on localized infrastructure. So looking at exemplar networks that were transplantable all around Australia as the type of things that we see in the NEM, wherever they may be. We picked a couple and applied them, but it was with real data, taking that and then applying overlays to that of what happens when we fully electrify the system, when we electrify gas and when we electrify transport in particular was what we were looking at. And that's to say, what's that impact on that local infrastructure? Can we actually say how things will be impacted? And so that was one level that we looked at. The second level was then, what are our levers to actually do something about that? And what is the economic framework that we could do to assess, is it worth doing that? Which ones are worthwhile and which ones aren't? I want to be really careful. We were not trying to predict when electrification would happen. We were looking at the physics of the system and saying, when it happens, you've got this many electrons to move in this sort of time frame, etc. What is the infrastructure, or what is the optimal type of infrastructure that we might need, and what are the choices that are there? And then thirdly, we looked at the overall and said, yes, but while you've got those down in distribution systems across the NEM, we've got 13 distribution systems, what role, rather than being takers of what comes from the transmission and the systems, so I'm talking about system strength and everything here, what actually can we now do at the back end? And you've heard time and time again, like the biggest generators are out at the edge of the grid. It will be soon that the biggest storage is out at the edge of the grid, and that flexibility drives us choice. As I say, on the left, we have largely how we do it now. We think of the integrated system plan is around the very top left box around there, around the transmission and generation. We then independently plan or act in the distribution systems. And when we say a distribution system, it's well worth thinking of that not just right at that street level where we see the poles and wires. There's actually a medium voltage network. There's also a high voltage network or sub-transmission network that comes in. And then what we want to see is when we actually do that in an integrated fashion, are there efficiency benefits? Are there things that we could design for differently in our infrastructure? And the answer is yes. So across just the key finding there, one was probably not surprising, but when you put 2 to 3 times the energy through those assets, there's going to be an impact. And those assets, we're going to need more assets that are there, or slightly different assets or repurposed assets. But it's not the same everywhere. It depends. And we've got real choices about how we do that. And there's a really expensive way to do it, and there's a much cheaper way to do it as well. So while those assets get impacted, understanding how they get impacted is the really important thing, because then you can look at what are the solutions. The second thing then is there any saving? Is there anything that we can do about it? And it's massive. So we could show from, when we think about latent infrastructure and what we've got there, you know that you will hear a lot about the transmission build-out that we need in order to support the transition. And that impacts all of us as consumers because it flows through onto our bill through the network charges. And so that transmission costs $20+ billion to go in. Is there a better way to do it? And what we showed was there are definitely some of the transmission that is needed, but there's some that could be done much better as well. We've got latent capacity in the distribution systems. You've seen the New South Wales Integrated Distribution Plan come out as well. They found very similar type studies. When you utilise largely those poles and wires that are there now to connect renewable assets directly into and have them closer to the source of where the demand is, actually it frees up it gives us a lot more flexibility around the transmission. Why does that matter? We can see at least $5 billion that can come out. And when I say at least, it was quite well north of there, where it was. So huge opportunity there. If you take that same logic and the methodologies that we developed up and move them out towards the edge, actually, there were even greater savings when you do harness right at consumer level. It gets more complex, and so that you have to then factor in really that cost side of things as well. But there were real advantages there. But one of the key challenges of the project when we went into it, we actually didn't know if it was possible. While we had all this data, it is complex, and is there a way that you could build methodologies that could be scaled around Australia? The ISP team do an amazing job at the moment of trying to pull that together with the challenges that they do, with heavy consultation, and a lot of people wanting to pull it in various directions. Actually, we showed it can, and it's worthwhile. There are benefits there if you can harness that planning right down to the consumer. So it broke very much new ground. Sort of our learnings were that it broke new ground. It took us more than a year to pull the project together. So these things are complex. And on the challenge side, one of the real challenges there then is that when you look across groups of people who are trying to solve, whose job is this to solve? It actually wasn't clear. Now, since then, it has become more clear, and there's been the energy ministers have called out where that should go, and that's great. But trying to bring parties together to solve it, we can all see the problem, but no one's actually resourced to go and do it. But putting that design up front really helped. Our system is definitely getting more complex, and we keep hearing about that. But at the same time, we have a whole lot more tools at hand. We heard about some of the AI tools and everything. We've got data. We were sitting here going, largely the data's there now. Engineers would always like a little more data, but actually there is sufficient data there to really try and think 10, 20, 30 years out. We don't know everything that's going to happen, but just with what we know today, we can do that. And so just to finish up, the big driver of the value is around harnessing the flexibility and having it out there. And as we go forward, we will hear of the differences in each of the networks. And it was interesting just hearing that last discussion of, especially around the competition side and everything, and we do charge them to work against each other, to compete against each other, to come up with more innovative and efficient solutions. But actually some of these challenges, we all face it together, and they'd be better off coming together. And certainly rather than one party, such as AEMO or government, or working with 13 different networks in the NEM, working collectively could actually come up with a much more efficient solution. So look, I wanted to thank very much the ECA for their support. All of this is available on the C4Net website, so please, it's there, it's usable and everything. And yeah, we showed that collaborative research it's really hard, but it can really have some great solutions. So thank you.